The scream tore through the rumble of the mill wheel like a knife through cloth, and Owen Rathmore dropped the sack of grain he had been hoisting, his heart lurching as he spun toward the river. The spring melt had turned the usually placid stream into a churning torrent, white water frothing over rocks that normally sat high and dry. And there in the middle of that chaos was a figure struggling against the current, green arms flailing as the water pulled her under and spat her back up again. Owen did not think, did not hesitate despite the shock of recognition that slammed into him when he saw the tusks jutting from her lower jaw and the pointed ears plastered against her skull. She was an orc, and every lesson his father had beaten into him said to let the monster drown, but his feet were already carrying him toward the riverbank, his hands already fumbling with the rope coiled near the water's edge. He looped the rope around his waist with fingers made clumsy by urgency, tying it to the thick oak post that anchored one side of his small dock, and then he was in the water, gasping as the cold bit into his skin like 1,000 frozen teeth. The current grabbed him immediately, trying to sweep him downstream, but Owen had grown up on this river, had learned its moods and its tricks, and he angled his body so the water pushed him toward the struggling figure rather than away. She went under again just as he reached her, and he dove, his hands finding slick green skin and a leather vest that was coming apart at the seams. He hauled her up, breaking the surface with a gasp, and wrapped one arm around her chest from behind, locking his grip even as she thrashed weakly against him. "Stop fighting me," he shouted over the roar of the water, but she was beyond hearing, beyond reason, her body operating on pure panicked instinct. Owen kicked hard, pulling them both toward the bank, using the rope as a guide hand over hand when the current allowed it, simply hanging on when it did not. His shoulders screamed, his lungs burned, and the cold was seeping into his bones, making his movements sluggish, but he refused to let go. The riverbank seemed impossibly far away, then suddenly close. Then his feet found purchase on slippery stones, and he was hauling them both up onto the muddy shore, collapsing onto his back with the orc girl sprawled half across his chest. For a long moment neither of them moved, both simply breathing in great heaving gulps, water streaming from their clothes and hair. Owen's entire body shook with cold and exhaustion, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. But he was alive. They were both alive, and that seemed like a miracle. The orc girl stirred first, rolling off him with a groan, and Owen turned his head to look at her properly for the first time. She was young, probably close to his own 23 years, with skin the color of new spring leaves and black hair that hung in wet ropes down her back. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her face, though different from human features, held a fierce beauty that caught him off guard. She wore leather trousers and the remains of what had once been a decent vest, both now torn and waterlogged, and when she opened her eyes they were the color of amber, bright and wild and full of confusion. She stared at him for a heartbeat too, and then her expression shifted into something harder, more guarded. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, coughing water, her entire body trembling. Owen sat up slowly, unwinding the rope from his waist with numb fingers, watching her warily. He had saved her life, yes, but that did not mean she would not try to kill him now that the immediate danger had passed. Orcs and humans had been enemies for generations. Ever since the first human settlers had pushed into these borderlands and clashed with the orc clans who considered this territory their own. The war had ended 5 years ago with an uneasy truce, but hatred did not die so easily, and Owen had lost his older brother to an orc raid when he was just 15. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice rough, and the orc girl's eyes snapped to his face, narrowing. She said nothing, just pushed herself to her feet in one fluid motion that belied how close she had just come to drowning. She swayed there for a moment, water dripping from her clothes to puddle at her feet, and Owen saw the way her hands clenched into fists, the way her jaw tightened. She was preparing to run or fight. He could not tell which, and he raised his hands slowly, palms out. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice as calm and level as he could manage despite the adrenaline still singing through his veins. "You were drowning. I pulled you out. That is all." The orc girl's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, and finding only exhaustion and sincerity. Some of the tension bled out of her shoulders, though her fists remained clenched. "Why?" she asked, and her voice was deeper than he had expected, rich and rough around the edges. "Why would you save me?" Owen opened his mouth, closed it again. It was a fair question, one he did not have a good answer for. Why had he saved her? Because she was drowning and he could not stand by and watch anyone die, even an orc. Because in that moment of crisis, his body had acted before his mind could catch up with all the reasons he should have let the river take her. He settled for honesty, the only thing he had to offer. "I do not know," he admitted. "I heard you scream and I just reacted." She studied him for a long moment, and then something in her expression softened, just a fraction. "I am Kira," she said, the words coming reluctantly, as if she was not certain she should be giving him her name. "Kira Ironjaw of the Stonefang clan." "Owen Rathmore," he replied automatically, then gestured back toward the mill, a sturdy stone building with a great wheel turning slowly in the current. "That is my mill. You should come inside, dry off by the fire before you freeze." He saw the refusal forming on her face and added quickly, "It is not kindness. It is practicality. I did not pull you out of the river just so you could die of cold on my riverbank." Kira's mouth twitched, almost a smile, and after a moment she nodded once, a sharp jerk of her chin. Owen led the way back to the mill, acutely aware of her presence behind him, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Bringing an orc into his home, even one he had saved, would be seen as betrayal by most of his neighbors. The village of Millbrook was only 2 miles downriver, and while the people there tolerated Owen's solitary existence well enough, they would not tolerate him harboring an orc. But what else was he supposed to do? Leave her to wander the woods soaked and shivering until the cold or the wildlife claimed her? The mill was warm inside, the air thick with the smell of grain and the rhythmic groan of the wheel. Owen had been in the middle of grinding when he heard Kira's scream, and flour dust hung in the air like snow. He led her past the grinding stones to the small living quarters he had built onto the back of the mill, a single large room with a fireplace on one wall, a bed in the corner, a table and 2 chairs near the window, and shelves holding his meager possessions. It was not much, but it was home, the only home he had known since his parents died of fever 3 winters past. Owen knelt by the fire and began building it up, adding logs until the flames leaped high and heat began to radiate into the room. Kira stood near the door, dripping onto his floor, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked lost, Owen thought, and vulnerable in a way that made something in his chest tighten. He crossed to the chest at the foot of his bed and pulled out a worn wool blanket, offering it to her. "Here. Get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Kira took the blanket, her amber eyes meeting his, and Owen saw the war happening behind them. Pride versus practicality, suspicion versus gratitude. Finally, practicality won, and she nodded. Owen turned his back, busying himself with stoking the fire and trying very hard not to think about the fact that there was an orc woman undressing in his home. He heard the wet slap of leather hitting the floor, the rustle of fabric, and then her voice, low and rough. "You can turn around." He did, slowly, and found her wrapped in the blanket, her wet clothes in a pile at her feet. Her hair hung loose now, dripping water down her shoulders, and without the armor of her leather vest, she looked smaller, more human somehow, though the green of her skin and the points of her ears reminded him constantly of what she was. Owen dragged one of the chairs closer to the fire and gestured for her to sit, then took her wet clothes and hung them on pegs near the hearth where they would dry. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant groan of the mill wheel. "What were you doing in the river?" Owen asked finally, settling into the other chair. "The spring melt makes it dangerous this time of year." Kira was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer, but then she sighed, a sound full of weariness. "I was trying to cross it," she said. "There is a ford about a mile upstream that is usually safe, but the water was higher than I expected. It caught me and pulled me under before I could get back to the bank." "Where were you going?" The question was out before Owen could stop it, and he saw Kira's expression close off, walls slamming back into place. "Never mind," he said quickly. "It is none of my business." But Kira surprised him by answering anyway, her voice flat and emotionless. "Away. I was going away from my clan, from the Stonefang territories. I have been cast out." Owen stared at her, shock momentarily robbing him of words. To be cast out from an orc clan was a death sentence or close enough to make no difference. Orcs lived in tight family groups, their clans providing protection, resources, identity. A lone orc would be vulnerable to human attack, to rival clans, to the simple, brutal realities of survival in the borderlands. "Why?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Kira's hands tightened on the blanket, her knuckles going pale green. "Because I refuse to kill a human child," she said, the words coming out harsh and bitter. 3 days ago, a raiding party from my clan attacked a human farmstead. I was with them. It is expected, the raids. Part of our way of life, our way of proving strength. But when we got there, there was only a woman and her 2 children. The men were gone, probably to the village for market day. My clanmates killed the woman." She paused, swallowing hard. "They were going to kill the children too. I stopped them. I stood between my own people and those 2 human younglings, and I told them no, that there was no honor in killing children." Owen felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened?" "My clan leader, my own uncle, declared me weak, corrupted by human sentiment. He said I was no true orc, no daughter of the Stonefang, and he cast me out on the spot. Told me if I ever set foot in clan territory again, he would kill me himself." Kira's voice was steady, but Owen could see the pain in her eyes, the raw wound of that rejection. "So I left. I have been walking for 3 days, trying to put distance between myself and everything I have ever known. I thought if I could cross the river, I could make it to the Eastern Territories, maybe find work as a hunter or a guard somewhere they do not know my shame." "That was not shame," Owen said fiercely, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "That was the right thing to do. Those children did not deserve to die any more than you deserve to be cast out for protecting them." Kira looked at him, really looked at him, and Owen saw confusion there mixed with something that might have been hope. "You do not hate me?" she asked quietly. "Even knowing what my people did to that woman, even knowing I am orc?" Owen thought about his brother, about the rage and grief he had carried for so long, and found that while it still hurt, it no longer consumed him. "My brother was killed by orcs," he said slowly. 5 years ago in the war. I hated your people for a long time. Maybe part of me still does. But you are not the orcs who killed him, and I am not the humans who drove your clans from their ancestral lands. We are just two people trying to survive in a world that seems determined to keep us apart." He met her eyes, holding her gaze. "You saved those children at great cost to yourself. That tells me more about who you are than the color of your skin or the shape of your teeth." Kira's eyes glistened, and she looked away quickly, blinking hard. "You are strange for a human," she muttered, but there was no heat in it, and Owen found himself smiling despite everything. "So I have been told," he said. They lapsed into silence again, but this time it was more comfortable, the tension between them easing. Owen stood and moved to the small pantry, pulling out bread and cheese and a jar of preserved apples his neighbor, old Mistress Grayson, had given him in exchange for milled flour. He set the food on the table along with 2 wooden plates and a knife, then poured water from a pitcher into 2 cups. "You must be hungry. Eat." Kira hesitated, then rose, keeping the blanket wrapped tightly around herself, and joined him at the table. She ate slowly at first, cautiously, as if expecting the food to be poisoned or snatched away. But as nothing bad happened, she began to eat with more enthusiasm. Owen found himself watching her, fascinated by the small differences between her mannerisms and those of the humans he knew. The way she tore the bread with her hands rather than breaking it, the way her tusks made her chew slightly differently, the unconscious grace in her movements even in this simple act of eating. "What will you do now?" he asked, when the worst of the hunger had been satisfied. "If you are cast out, where will you go?" Kira set down her cup, her expression troubled. "I do not know," she admitted. "The Eastern Territories are still weeks of travel from here, and I have no supplies, no money, nothing but what I was wearing when I left. I thought I could hunt along the way, but the river took my knife and my pack when it pulled me under. I have nothing." Owen made a decision in that moment, one that he knew was probably foolish, probably dangerous, but felt right in a way few things in his life ever had. "Stay here," he said. "At least for a few days, until you have recovered your strength and I can put together some supplies for you. The mill does not make me rich, but I have enough to spare a little food and a spare knife." Kira stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. "You would let me stay?" "An orc in your home? I pulled you out of the river," Owen said simply. "Seems a waste to have done that if I just send you back out to die in the woods. Besides, you said it yourself, you have nothing. How far do you think you would get like that?" "Not far," Kira admitted. "But your neighbors, your village, if they found out you were sheltering me, they would not understand. They would call you a traitor or worse." "Then we will make sure they do not find out," Owen said. "The mill is isolated enough. As long as you stay inside or close to the building, no one from the village will see you. Most people only come by once a week to drop off grain or pick up flour, and I can handle those visits alone." Kira was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face again, looking for the trap, the ulterior motive. But Owen kept his expression open, honest, and finally she nodded slowly. "A few days," she said. "Just until I am strong enough to travel, and then I will be gone, I promise." "A few days," Owen agreed, and tried to ignore the small voice in the back of his mind that whispered that a few days might not be nearly long enough. That first night was awkward in ways Owen had not anticipated. He offered Kira his bed and made himself a pallet of blankets on the floor by the fire, but sleep eluded him for hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her struggling in the water, felt the weight of her body as he dragged her to shore, heard the pain in her voice when she spoke of being cast out by her own family. When he finally did drift off, his dreams were troubled, full of green skin and amber eyes, and a sense of standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. He woke to find pale dawn light filtering through the window and Kira already up, sitting by the fire wrapped in his blanket, staring into the flames. She looked up when he stirred, and for a moment their eyes met and held, something passing between them that Owen could not name. Then the moment broke and Owen stood, stretching the kinks out of his back, and set about the morning routine. He built up the fire, put a pot of porridge on to cook, and stepped outside to check the mill wheel and make sure the overnight rain had not caused any problems. The world outside was fresh and clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and growing things. Spring was fully upon them now, the trees leafed out in brilliant green, wildflowers carpeting the meadow that stretched between the mill and the forest edge. Owen took a deep breath, centering himself, and then set to work. There was always work to be done at a mill, and he lost himself in it, checking the gears, oiling the mechanisms, ensuring everything ran smoothly. When he returned to the living quarters an hour later, he found Kira dressed in her own clothes, which had dried overnight, and ladling porridge into 2 bowls. They ate in companionable silence, and then Owen showed her around the mill properly, explaining how the wheel worked, how the grain was fed into the stones, how the flour was collected and sifted. Kira listened intently, asking intelligent questions, and Owen found himself enjoying the teaching, the chance to share this knowledge with someone who seemed genuinely interested. His father had taught him the trade, and his father's father before that, and there was something deeply satisfying about continuing that tradition, even in this strange and unexpected way. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Owen worked the mill, grinding grain for the farmers who brought it, maintaining the equipment, managing the accounts in his careful ledger. Kira helped where she could, her orc strength proving useful for tasks that would have taken Owen twice as long alone. She could hoist sacks of grain that would have made him strain, could turn the manual crank to adjust the stone spacing without breaking a sweat. In the evenings they cooked simple meals together and talked, carefully at first, then with growing ease, sharing stories of their pasts, their families, their hopes and fears. Owen learned that Kira had 3 younger siblings, all still with the clan, and that leaving them had been the hardest part of her exile. She had raised them after their mother died in childbirth with the youngest, had taught them to hunt and fight and navigate the complex politics of clan life. She spoke of them with a fierce love that made Owen's chest ache, and he found himself telling her about his brother in return, about the bright laughing boy who had wanted to be a soldier, who had died in some nameless skirmish on the border and been brought home wrapped in a cloak, his face peaceful in death. Kira reached across the table and took his hand when he finished that story, her green fingers warm against his pale ones, and the simple gesture of comfort meant more to Owen than he could express. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, 2 people from opposite sides of a bitter divide finding common ground in shared grief. On the 4th day, a farmer named Thomas brought grain to be milled, and Owen had to send Kira upstairs to the loft where he stored empty sacks, warning her to be absolutely silent. She went without complaint, and Owen conducted his business with Thomas with his heart in his throat, terrified that Kira would sneeze or shift her weight wrong and give herself away. But she remained perfectly still, and Thomas left none the wiser, and Owen sagged with relief once the man was out of sight down the road. Kira came down from the loft with flour dust in her hair and a wry expression on her face. "That was unpleasant," she said, hiding like a criminal. "I know," Owen said. "I am sorry, but if he had seen you, the whole village would know by nightfall, and then we would both be in danger." "I know," Kira echoed, and there was understanding in her eyes, but sadness too. "This cannot last, Owen, you know that, yes? Eventually someone will find out, or I will have to leave, or something will happen to break this fragile peace we have built here. Owen knew she was right, but he did not want to think about it, did not want to face the reality that this strange interlude could not go on forever. Then we will deal with it when it happens, he said firmly. But until then, you are safe here, and that is what matters. Kira looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her face, making her beautiful in a way that stole Owen's breath. You are a good man, Owen Rathmore, she said softly. Better than I deserve. That is not true, Owen said, but Kira just shook her head and turned away, and he let the matter drop, though her words stayed with him, warm and confusing in equal measure. A week passed, then two, and the few days Kira had promised to stay stretched on with no mention of her leaving. Owen told himself it was practical, that she needed time to fully recover, to build up her strength and resources before setting out on such a dangerous journey. But the truth was he did not want her to go, had come to enjoy her company in ways he had not enjoyed anyone's company in years. She was clever and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was strong and capable, never shirking work, always pulling her weight. And she was beautiful, though Owen tried very hard not to think about that, tried to ignore the way his pulse quickened when she smiled at him or the way his skin tingled when their hands accidentally brushed. It was dangerous, what he was feeling. He knew that. Orcs and humans did not fall in love, did not build lives together. The world would not allow it, society would not tolerate it, and even if they could somehow overcome all of that, what kind of life could they have? Always hiding, always looking over their shoulders, always one discovered secret away from disaster. Better to keep things friendly, platonic, safe. Better to help her and then let her go, to return to his solitary life and his mill and try not to think about amber eyes and green skin, and a laugh that sounded like coming home. But hearts, Owen was learning, did not listen to reason. The realization that he had fallen in love with Kira hit him one evening as they sat by the fire, Kira mending a tear in her vest while Owen worked on his accounts. She was humming under her breath, some orc tune he did not recognize, her face relaxed and content in the firelight. Owen looked up from his ledger and saw her there, so comfortable in his space, so much a part of his life now, and the knowledge crashed over him like a wave. He loved her. He loved this orc woman who had stumbled into his life by accident, who challenged him and made him laugh and made him want to be better than he was. He loved her, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Kira looked up and caught him staring, her eyebrows raising in question. What? She asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Do I have something on my face? No, Owen managed, dragging his eyes back to his ledger and seeing nothing but a blur of numbers. No, I was just thinking. About what? About you, Owen thought but did not say. About how much I do not want you to leave. About how terrified I am of what I am feeling. Instead he said, about how I need to order more flour sacks from the cooper in the village, which was both true and a complete deflection. Kira made a non-committal sound and went back to her mending, and Owen tried very hard to focus on his accounts and not on the way his heart was still racing, not on the sweet ache in his chest that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with hopeless, foolish longing. The weather turned warm as spring deepened into early summer, and Kira began venturing outside more, though always carefully, always watching for signs of visitors. She helped Owen plant a vegetable garden behind the mill, her knowledge of growing things surprising him, until she explained that her clan had maintained several large gardens to supplement their hunting. They worked side by side in the sun, hands in the dark earth, and Owen was acutely aware of her presence beside him, of the way the sunlight caught in her black hair, and the way her muscles moved under her green skin as she worked. One afternoon, as they took a break to drink water and wipe the sweat from their faces, Kira turned to him with a serious expression. "Owen, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, settling onto the grass beside her. "Why have you never married?" "A man your age with property and a trade, you should have had offers." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I did have offers," he said finally. "A few over the years, but after my parents died and I inherited the mill, I found I liked the solitude. I liked not having to answer to anyone, not having to worry about anyone's needs but my own, and none of the women who showed interest ever felt right, if that makes sense. I always felt like I would be settling, like I would be trapping myself in a life that did not fit. And now?" Kira asked softly, "Do you still like the solitude?" Owen looked at her, at the vulnerability in her eyes, the question she was not quite asking, and made a choice. "No," he said honestly. "Not anymore. The mill is less lonely with you here. I am less lonely with you here." Kira drew in a sharp breath, her eyes widening, and for a moment Owen thought he had overstepped, had said too much. But then she reached out and took his hand, threading her green fingers through his pale ones, and held on tight. "I do not want to leave," she whispered. "I know I should. I know this cannot last, but I do not want to go, Owen. I have never felt as safe or as happy as I do here with you." Owen's heart was hammering so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Then stay," he said, the words rough with emotion. "Not for a few days or a few weeks. Just stay." "And do what?" Kira asked, her voice breaking. "Hide forever. Live in fear that someone will discover me. That is not a life, Owen, not for either of us." "Then we will figure something out," Owen said desperately. "We will find a way to make this work. I do not have all the answers, Kira, but I know I do not want to lose you. I know that what we have here is worth fighting for." Kira's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, and Owen could feel the trembling in her, the war between hope and fear. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to want this, afraid to believe it could be real." "So am I," Owen admitted. "But I think maybe the best things are always a little bit frightening." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, to let her see the truth written plainly on his face. "I love you, Kira. I do not know when it happened or how, but I love you, and I want you to stay, not as a guest or a refugee, but as my partner. As my wife, if you will have me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect, and Kira stared at him as if he had just offered her the world. "You cannot mean that," she said, but her voice was full of desperate hope. "Owen, we are from different worlds. Your people will never accept me. My people have already cast me out. How can we possibly build a life together?" "I do not know," Owen said again, "but I want to try." "If you want to try, then I want to fight for this, for us, for the chance at something real and true and good." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over the sharp angles of her cheekbones. "Marry me, Kira. Stay with me. Let us build a life together, here at the mill, and damn anyone who says we should not." Kira's tears spilled over then, tracking down her green cheeks, and she laughed through them, a sound of pure joy mixed with disbelief. "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her like it had been held captive too long. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you, I will stay, I will fight for this with you." And then Owen was kissing her, or she was kissing him. He was not certain which, but it did not matter because her lips were warm against his and her arms were around his neck, and she was there, solid and real and his. The kiss was sweet and desperate and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen felt like his heart might actually burst from the sheer, overwhelming rightness of it all. They sat there in the grass behind the mill, holding each other as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, and made plans in low voices. They would marry, but it would have to be done quietly, privately, without the formal ceremony that would require announcing their intentions to the village. Owen knew a traveling priest who came through the borderlands occasionally, performing marriages and baptisms for those who lived too far from established churches. He would seek the man out, explain the situation, and hope that compassion would win out over prejudice. And even if they could not have an official ceremony, they could still make vows to each other, bind their lives together in the sight of whatever gods might be listening. The practical matters were thornier. Kira would have to continue hiding from most visitors, at least until they could gauge how the village might react. Owen thought perhaps if they presented it as a fait accompli, if he simply introduced Kira as his wife and made it clear she was there to stay, some people might accept it. Others would not, he knew, would call him traitor and orc lover and worse. But Owen found he did not care as much about their opinions as he once might have. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit into the mold his father and the village had created for him, to be the dutiful son, the reliable miller, the respectable pillar of the community. It was time, he thought, to live for himself, to choose his own path even if it led somewhere the village did not approve. They went inside as the light faded, and Owen cooked a celebratory dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, the best meal he could manage from his limited stores. They ate by candlelight, and Owen found himself memorizing every detail. The way the shadows played across Kira's face, the sound of her laugh, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him. This was happiness, he realized. This strange, unexpected, fragile happiness that he had found with an orc woman he had pulled from a river. It was not what he had ever imagined for his life, but it was perfect nonetheless. That night, Kira did not sleep in the bed while Owen took the floor. They slept together, chaste but close, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, and Owen had never felt more at peace. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet joy and careful planning. Owen made discreet inquiries about the traveling priest, and learned that Father Benedict was due to pass through the region within the month. He sent word through a trusted intermediary, asking the priest to stop at the mill, and received word back that the man would come. Owen did not explain why he needed the visit, but Father Benedict was known for his kindness and his willingness to serve the people of the borderlands without judgment, and Owen hoped that reputation would hold true. In the meantime, life at the mill continued. Owen worked his trade, and Kira helped him, and in the evenings they talked and planned and dreamed about the future they would build together. Kira taught Owen some of the orc language, and he taught her more about human customs and traditions. They laughed together over the cultural misunderstandings that cropped up, over the small ways their different upbringings had shaped them. And slowly, carefully, they began to weave their lives together, 2 disparate threads creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have managed alone. But peace, Owen was learning, was always temporary. It was a warm afternoon in midsummer when everything fell apart. Owen was working in the mill, adjusting the grinding stones, when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. It was not a single visitor with grain to be milled. It was a group of riders, 6 men from the village, led by Marcus Thornton, the village headman's son, and a man who had never made any secret of his hatred for orcs. Owen's mind raced. Kira was upstairs in the loft, folding grain sacks, well out of sight but not out of earshot. If the men came inside, if they searched, they would find her. He had to keep them outside, had to get rid of them as quickly as possible. He wiped the flour dust from his hands and stepped out to meet the riders, forcing a smile he did not feel. "Marcus," he said, nodding to the headman's son. "Gentlemen, what brings you all the way out here?" Marcus did not return the smile. He sat tall in his saddle, his hand resting on the sword at his hip, and his eyes were cold. "We have had reports, Rathmore," he said. "Reports of strange goings-on at the mill. Livestock going missing, supplies disappearing. People are nervous." Owen's mind worked frantically. He had not taken any livestock or supplies, had barely left the mill in weeks. This was a pretext, he realized, an excuse to search, to snoop, to find something incriminating. "I do not know anything about missing livestock," he said carefully. "I have been here, minding my own business and working the mill. You are welcome to look around if you like, but you will not find anything." It was a calculated risk, offering the search. To refuse would make him look guilty, but to allow it risked everything. Owen was gambling that the men would take his word and leave, that they would not bother with the effort of actually searching. But Marcus's eyes gleamed, and Owen knew he had miscalculated. "We will take you up on that," Marcus said, swinging down from his horse. The other men followed suit, and Owen's heart sank. He led them into the mill, talking constantly, pointing out the grinding stones, the grain stores, the flour sacks waiting to be picked up, trying to distract them, to keep their attention on him and away from the loft above. But Marcus was not so easily distracted. His eyes swept the interior of the mill, noting every detail, and then he looked up at the loft. "What is up there?" he asked. "Storage," Owen said, keeping his voice level. "Empty sacks, tools, nothing of interest." "I will be the judge of that," Marcus said, and started toward the ladder. Owen's hand shot out, grabbing the other man's arm. "There is no need to go up there. I told you there is nothing." Marcus turned, shaking off Owen's grip, and his expression was triumphant. He knew, Owen realized. Somehow he knew or suspected, and he was looking for proof. "Funny thing, Rathmore," Marcus said softly. "Young Tim from the village swears he saw smoke coming from your chimney at odd hours, more than a man living alone would need. And old Mistress Grayson mentioned that the jar of apples she traded you should have lasted you months, but when she asked you last week how you were enjoying them, you said they were already gone. Made her think maybe you have been feeding someone besides yourself." Owen felt the trap closing around him, felt the weight of discovery pressing down. He could deny it, could try to bluff his way through, but what was the point? If they searched the loft and found Kira, it would be worse than if he admitted the truth now. At least this way he might have some control over the situation. He took a deep breath, meeting Marcus's eyes squarely. "You are right," he said. "I have not been alone. I have been sheltering someone." The men tensed, hands going to weapons, and Marcus's expression went hard and cold. "An orc," he said flatly. It was not a question. "Yes," Owen said. "An orc woman. I saved her from drowning in the river 2 months ago, and I have been giving her shelter." "You have been harboring an enemy of humanity," Marcus spat. "You have been committing treason, Rathmore." "I have been helping someone in need," Owen shot back, his own temper flaring now that the secret was out. "She was drowning and I pulled her out. Was I supposed to let her die?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "You were supposed to let the monster die. Instead, you brought it into your home, you fed it, you sheltered it, and gods only know what else." His lip curled in disgust. "Where is it? Bring it out." Owen wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Marcus to go to hell and get off his property, but he could see the other men fanning out, hands on their weapons, and he knew that resistance would only end in violence. And Kira would be the one to suffer for it. "Kira," he called, his voice tight. "You can come down." There was a long moment of silence, And then Kira appeared at the top of the ladder, climbing down with her head high and her shoulders back, refusing to show fear even though Owen could see it in her eyes. She stepped up beside him, and Owen reached out, taking her hand in his, a gesture of solidarity and defiance. "This is Kira," he said. "She is not a monster or an enemy. She is a person just like you and me." The men stared at her with a mixture of fear and hatred, and Marcus's hand tightened on his sword. "It is an orc," he said flatly, "and you have been sheltering it. That is a crime, Rathmore, one that carries serious consequences." "What are you going to do?" Owen demanded. "Kill her, kill me." "For the crime of showing compassion, we are going to take it back to the village," Marcus said. "Let the headman decide what is to be done with it. As for you, you will face judgment as well for your actions." "No," Owen said, stepping in front of Kira. "I will not let you take her." Marcus drew his sword, the sound of steel on leather loud in the confined space. "You do not have a choice." "There is always a choice," Owen said, his voice low and dangerous. He did not have a weapon, had never been a fighter, but he would not let them take Kira without a fight. "You will have to go through me." Kira's hand tightened on his, and she stepped up beside him, her voice clear and strong. "Do not fight them for me, Owen. It is not worth your life." "You are worth everything," Owen said fiercely, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "I will not let them hurt you." "How touching," Marcus sneered. "The miller and his pet orc. This is disgusting, Rathmore. You have betrayed everything your family stood for, everything your brother died for." Owen felt rage surge through him, hot and blinding. "Do not you dare speak of my brother," he said, his voice shaking with the force of his emotion. "You did not know him. He would have understood what I am doing here. He would have seen that Kira is not the enemy." "Your brother would be ashamed of you," Marcus shot back, and Owen lunged forward, his fist connecting with the other man's jaw in a satisfying crack. Everything erupted into chaos. The other men surged forward, grabbing Owen, pulling him back, and Marcus staggered, his sword clattering to the floor. Kira moved like lightning, grabbing one of the men and throwing him bodily across the room into a stack of grain sacks. Another man drew a knife and slashed at her, catching her across the arm, and Kira roared, a sound of pure fury that made the rafters shake. Owen fought against the men holding him, terror for Kira overriding all rational thought. He saw her trading blows with two of the men, her orc strength giving her the advantage even unarmed, but there were too many of them, and they were armed. One of the men got behind her and brought the pommel of his sword down on the back of her head, and Kira dropped like a stone, her body crumpling to the floor. "No." Owen screamed, redoubling his efforts to break free, but the men holding him were strong, and his vision was blurring with tears and rage. Marcus picked up his sword, wiping blood from his split lip, and advanced on where Kira lay motionless. Owen's heart stopped, certain he was about to watch the woman he loved die, but Marcus simply kicked her once, hard, and then gestured to the other men. "Bind them both," he ordered. "We are taking them to the village to stand trial." They tied Owen's hands behind his back with rough rope that bit into his wrists, and did the same to Kira, who was just starting to stir, groaning in pain. Owen was dragged outside and thrown onto one of the horses, his hands bound to the saddle horn, and Kira was similarly secured. Blood ran down her arm from the knife wound, staining her vest, and there was a lump forming on the back of her head, but her eyes when they met Owen's were clear and full of defiance. "I am sorry," Owen said, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry, Kira. This is my fault." "It is no one's fault," Kira said firmly. "We knew the risks. We chose this anyway." Marcus mounted his own horse and took the lead, and the grim procession set off down the road toward Millbrook. Owen's mind raced, trying to think of a way out, a way to save Kira, but he came up empty. They were outnumbered, outarmed, and bound. There was nothing he could do but pray that somehow, someway, justice would prevail. The village of Millbrook was small, barely more than a collection of houses and shops clustered around a central square. By the time the procession arrived, it seemed like every resident had turned out to see what the commotion was about. People lined the streets, staring as Owen and Kira were led through on horseback, and Owen heard the whispers start, the gasps of shock and disgust as they recognized the orc woman. They were taken to the headman's hall, a large wooden building that served as courthouse, meeting place, and administrative center for the village. Owen and Kira were hauled off their horses and dragged inside, their hands still bound, and thrown to their knees in front of a raised dais where Alderman Thornton sat, Marcus's father and the man who governed Millbrook. Alderman Thornton was old, his hair gone white and his face deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and his voice when he spoke was strong. "What is the meaning of this, Marcus? Why have you brought an orc into my hall?" Marcus stepped forward, his expression self-satisfied. "Father, I have discovered a traitor in our midst. Owen Rathmore has been sheltering this orc at his mill for months, giving it aid and comfort in direct violation of the king's peace." The alderman's eyes shifted to Owen, and Owen saw disappointment there, mixed with anger. "Is this true, Owen? Have you been harboring an orc?" Owen lifted his chin, refusing to show the fear that was eating him alive. "Yes, sir, I have, but it is not as Marcus makes it sound. Kira was drowning in the river. I pulled her out and gave her shelter because it was the right thing to do. She is not an enemy. She was cast out from her own clan for refusing to kill human children. She saved their lives, and it cost her everything." A murmur ran through the crowd that had gathered in the hall, people whispering to each other, and the alderman raised a hand for silence. "That may be," he said slowly. "But the law is clear. Orcs and humans are not to mingle. The truce that ended the war depends on both sides keeping to their own territories. By bringing an orc here, you have violated that truce." "The truce is already broken," Kira said suddenly, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "My clan violates it every time they raid human settlements. Your people violate it every time they push farther into orc lands. The truce is a fiction we tell ourselves to pretend the war is over when really it just simmers beneath the surface, waiting to explode again. But what Owen and I have is not part of that cycle of violence. We have chosen something different. We have chosen each other, chosen to build a life based on trust and love rather than hate and fear." "Pretty words," Marcus sneered, "but you are still an orc, and orcs cannot be trusted." "And yet I trust her with my life," Owen said. "I love her. We are going to be married." The gasps that met that announcement were louder, shocked and scandalized, and Alderman Thornton's expression hardened. "That is not possible," he said flatly. "The church does not recognize marriages between humans and orcs. Such a union would be an abomination." "Not to me," Owen said desperately. "Not to us. Please, Alderman, I am begging you. Show mercy. Kira has done nothing wrong." "I have done nothing wrong except try to live my life with the person I love." The alderman was silent for a long moment, his weathered face troubled. Finally, he sighed. "I do not doubt your sincerity, Owen, but I cannot simply ignore the law. You have put me in an impossible position." He looked at Kira, his expression unreadable. "As for you, orc woman, your presence here is a violation of the truce. By rights, I should have you executed or sent back to your clan." "My clan will kill me," Kira said calmly, "and execution would be a quicker death than they would give me." "So do what you will, human. I am not afraid." Owen's heart was breaking, shattering into 1,000 pieces as he watched Kira face her fate with such courage. "Please," he said again, and hated the way his voice broke on the word. "Please do not do this. There has to be another way." The doors to the hall slammed open, and everyone turned to see who had entered. Owen's breath caught. It was Father Benedict, the traveling priest, his simple brown robe dusty from the road and his face kind beneath his graying beard. "Forgive the interruption, Alderman," the priest said, his voice warm and gentle. "But I could not help but overhear the proceedings as I arrived in the village, and I thought perhaps I might offer some perspective." Alderman Thornton frowned. "This is a legal matter, Father." "I am not certain the church has jurisdiction." "Perhaps not," Father Benedict agreed, approaching the dais, "but you mentioned marriage, and that is very much the church's business." He looked at Owen and Kira, his eyes kind. "You wish to marry, the two of you?" "Yes," Owen said fervently. "More than anything." Father Benedict nodded slowly, then turned to address the crowd. "I have spent my life traveling these borderlands, ministering to those who live on the edges of civilization. I have seen much cruelty and much hatred, but I have also seen great acts of kindness and courage. The young man before you pulled a drowning woman from a river, not because it was easy or safe, but because it was right. The young woman before you defied her own people to save human children, knowing it would cost her everything. These are not the actions of villains or traitors. These are the actions of people guided by conscience and compassion." "But the law," Marcus protested. "The truce." "The truce was meant to end the killing, to bring peace," Father Benedict said firmly. "But there can be no true peace built on a foundation of hatred and separation. If we are to heal the wounds between our peoples, it must start somewhere. Why not here, with two people who have chosen love over fear?" He looked at the alderman. "I am willing to perform a marriage ceremony for Owen and Kira if that is their wish. Not in secret, but here publicly, so that all may witness their commitment. It may not be recognized by the king's law, but it will be recognized by the law of the church and the law of their own hearts." The alderman looked troubled, torn between duty and compassion. "You would do this, Father?" "Knowing the controversy it would cause." "I would," Father Benedict said simply. "Because I believe it is the right thing to do. Because I believe that love, true love that causes people to risk everything for each other, is a gift from God, no matter what form it takes." The hall erupted into arguing, people shouting their opinions, some in support and many in opposition. Alderman Thornton raised his hands for silence, and slowly the noise died down. He looked at Owen and Kira for a long moment, and Owen held his breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine the rest of their lives. Finally, the alderman spoke. "I cannot condone what you have done, Owen. By the letter of the law you should be punished, and the orc woman should be expelled or worse. But Father Benedict is right. If we are ever to have true peace, it must start with people willing to take risks to bridge the divide." He sighed heavily. "I will not stand in the way of your marriage. But neither can I simply ignore what has happened. Owen Rathmore, you will be fined a sum of 50 silver crowns for harboring an orc without permission. Consider it the price of your defiance. And as for you," he looked at Kira, "you may stay in Millbrook, but you do so under Owen's surety. If you cause any trouble, if you break any law, he will be held responsible. Do you both accept these terms?" "Yes," Owen said immediately, relief flooding through him so intensely he felt lightheaded. "Yes, we accept." Kira nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "We accept with gratitude." "Then let us be done with this," the alderman said. "Father Benedict, if you are willing to perform the ceremony, you may do so now." The priest smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "It would be my honor." He gestured for Owen and Kira to stand, and Marcus stepped forward reluctantly to cut their bonds. Owen rubbed his wrists, feeling returning painfully to his hands, and then he reached for Kira, taking her hands in his. They stood facing each other in the center of the hall, surrounded by the people of Millbrook, some supportive and many still hostile, but Owen found he did not care. All that mattered was Kira, the woman he loved, standing before him ready to pledge her life to his. Father Benedict began the ceremony, his voice warm and sure as he spoke the ancient words. He talked about love and commitment, about the sacred bond between two souls, about the courage it took to build a life together in the face of adversity. He asked Owen if he took Kira to be his wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death did them part. "I do," Owen said, his voice strong and clear, and he saw Kira's eyes fill with tears. Father Benedict turned to Kira and asked her the same question, and Kira's voice, when she answered, was equally strong. "I do, with all my heart." "Then by the power vested in me by the Church and by the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife," Father Benedict said, smiling broadly. "Owen, you may kiss your bride." Owen did not hesitate. He pulled Kira into his arms and kissed her, pouring every ounce of love and relief and joy into that kiss, and when they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. The crowd in the hall was silent, some people looking scandalized, but others, Owen saw, looked moved, thoughtful, as if perhaps they were reconsidering their prejudices. The alderman cleared his throat. "Very well. The matter is settled. Owen, you will have 1 month to pay the fine. Everyone else, return to your business. The spectacle is over." People began to file out of the hall, some casting curious glances back at Owen and Kira, others pointedly ignoring them. Marcus looked furious, his face red with anger, but his father's quelling glance kept him silent. When the hall had mostly emptied, Father Benedict approached them, clasping Owen's shoulder warmly. "Congratulations," he said. "I wish you both every happiness." "Thank you, Father," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for what you did. We would be lost without your intervention." "Nonsense," Father Benedict said. "You would have found a way. Love like yours does not give up so easily." He smiled at Kira. "Welcome to the family of humankind, my dear. I hope you will find more kindness here than you have seen thus far." "I have already found kindness," Kira said, looking at Owen. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Father Benedict blessed them both and then departed, promising to return in a few months to check on how they were faring. Owen and Kira left the hall together, stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight, and Owen felt as if he could breathe fully for the first time in hours. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived, and they were married, bound together not just by love but by law and by faith. The walk back to the mill was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts, processing everything that had happened. When they arrived, Owen saw that the mill had been left in disarray from the fight, grain sacks scattered, flour dust everywhere. He and Kira set about cleaning it up together, working in companionable silence, and by the time night fell and they sat down to a simple dinner of bread and cheese, the mill looked almost normal again. "What happens now?" Kira asked as they sat by the fire, her head resting on Owen's shoulder. "We are married, but the village still does not truly accept me. How do we build a life here, 1 day at a time?" Owen said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We show them that we are not a threat. We work hard, we contribute to the community, we prove that love between our peoples is possible. It will not be easy. There will be people who never accept us. But there will be others who come around, who see us for who we really are rather than what we represent. And if they do not?" Kira asked quietly, "What if we are always outsiders, always suspect?" "Then we will be outsiders together," Owen said firmly. "And we will build our own family, our own community. We will create the world we want to live in, even if we have to do it alone." Kira was quiet for a moment, and then she turned to look at him, her amber eyes serious. "I love you, Owen Rathmore. I did not think it was possible to love someone this much, but I do. You have given me everything. Your home, your name, your protection, your heart. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." "You already are," Owen said, cupping her face in his hands. "You are the bravest, strongest, most incredible person I have ever met. I am the one who needs to be worthy of you." They kissed, slow and sweet, and then Kira stood, holding out her hand to him. "Come to bed, husband. We have earned our rest." Owen took her hand and let her lead him to the bed they would now share as husband and wife. They lay down together, Kira curling into his side, and Owen wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Outside, the mill wheel turned in the current, its familiar rhythm a comforting backdrop. Inside, two people from different worlds fell asleep in each other's arms, safe and loved and home at last. The next few months were difficult in ways Owen had anticipated and ways he had not. The 50 silver crown fine took a significant chunk of his savings, leaving them with very little cushion for emergencies. Some of the villagers, led by Marcus, made it clear they would never accept Kira and went out of their way to make life difficult. They stopped bringing their grain to Owen's mill, forcing him to travel farther to find customers. They spread rumors, whispered that Kira was a spy, that she would murder Owen in his sleep, that she was consorting with dark forces. But there were bright spots too. Mistress Grayson, the elderly woman who had traded apples for flour, came to the mill a week after the wedding with a gift of fresh, baked bread and a warm hug for Kira. "Pay no mind to the fools," she said briskly. "I knew there was something different about you, Owen, when you started going through my apples so quickly. I am glad to know it was for such a good reason." Other villagers, while not openly friendly, at least became civil, nodding to Kira when they passed on the road, conducting their business at the mill without incident. Kira proved herself invaluable, not just at the mill but in the community. When a fire broke out in one of the village houses, she was the first to arrive, her orc strength allowing her to carry out furniture and possessions that would have taken 3 men to move. When a child fell into the river during a fishing expedition, Kira dove in without hesitation and brought the boy safely to shore. Slowly, gradually, people began to see her not as a monster but as a person, as someone who cared about the community and contributed to it. Owen watched his wife navigate this new world with pride and love that only deepened with time. She was kind to those who showed her kindness and coolly polite to those who did not. She worked hard, never complaining about the long hours or the difficult labor. And in the evenings, when it was just the two of them, she was warm and loving, filling Owen's life with a joy he had never known before. Summer turned to autumn, the leaves changing color and the air growing crisp. Owen and Kira harvested the vegetable garden they had planted together, storing up food for the winter. They made improvements to the mill, reinforcing the wheel, replacing worn boards, making the space more comfortable and efficient. And they talked, endlessly, about their hopes and dreams, about the future they wanted to build. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kira placed Owen's hand on her stomach and gave him a smile that was equal parts nervous and joyful. "I am pregnant," she said simply. "We are going to have a child." Owen stared at her, the words not quite registering at first, and then suddenly he was laughing and crying at the same time, pulling Kira into his arms and holding her as tightly as he dared. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Kira asked, and Owen heard the uncertainty in her voice, the fear that this news might be too much, might be unwanted. Happy. Owen pulled back to look at her, making sure she could see the truth in his eyes. Kira, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. We are going to be parents. Kira's smile was radiant and she laughed, the sound bright and free. We are going to be parents, she echoed. I cannot quite believe it. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about names and preparing the mill for a baby. Owen would need to build a cradle, would need to set aside money for supplies and a midwife. Kira wondered aloud what their child would look like, whether it would have more human features or more orc ones, and Owen told her truthfully that he did not care, that he would love their child regardless. Winter came, blanketing the mill in snow, and Kira's pregnancy progressed. She grew round-bellied and glowing, more beautiful to Owen than ever before. The villagers, when they heard the news, had mixed reactions. Some were horrified at the thought of a half-orc child being born in Millbrook. Others, particularly those who had come to know and respect Kira, offered congratulations and gifts. Mistress Grayson knitted tiny blankets and hats, presenting them to Kira with a proud smile. Father Benedict, passing through on one of his circuits, blessed Kira and the baby, praying for a safe delivery and a healthy child. Marcus remained openly hostile, but even he seemed to realize that the tide was turning, that public opinion was slowly shifting in favor of the unusual couple. The alderman, when Owen encountered him in the village square one day, stopped to ask after Kira's health and to express his hope that the birth would go smoothly. It was not warm acceptance, but it was something, and Owen clung to it as a sign that perhaps, eventually, they would find their place in this community. Spring returned, bringing with it new life and new hope. The snow melted, the river swelled with runoff, and Kira went into labor on a warm afternoon in late April. Owen sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Anne who had delivered half the babies in Millbrook, and tried not to panic as Kira's contractions grew stronger and closer together. The labor was long and difficult, Kira's orc physiology making things slightly different from what the midwife was used to. But Anne adapted, and finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, their baby was born, a son. They had a son, with green-tinted skin a shade lighter than Kira's, with tiny tusks just beginning to show, with Owen's dark hair and Kira's amber eyes. He was perfect, beautiful, a living symbol of the love between two people who should never have met but did, who should never have fallen in love but had, who should never have been able to build a life together but were doing exactly that. Kira cradled their son to her chest, tears streaming down her face, and Owen knelt beside the bed, one hand on his wife's shoulder and one finger held gently by his son's tiny fist. "He is perfect," Owen whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Kira asked, looking up at Owen with so much love in her eyes it made his breath catch. Owen thought for a moment, then smiled. "Garrick," he said. "It is a strong name, a good name. Garrick Rathmore." "Garrick," Kira repeated, testing the name, and then she nodded. "Yes, Garrick. Welcome to the world, little one. You are so loved." The midwife cleaned up, offered her congratulations, and departed, leaving the new family alone. Owen climbed into bed beside Kira, carefully so as not to jostle her or the baby, and the three of them lay there together, a unit, a family. Outside, the mill wheel turned and the river flowed and the world continued on. But inside, everything had changed. Everything was new and precious and full of promise. In the days and weeks that followed, word of Garrick's birth spread through Millbrook. Some people stayed away, unwilling to acknowledge the half-orc child. But others, more than Owen had dared hope, came to visit, bringing gifts and offering congratulations. They peered at Garrick in his cradle, marveling at his tiny features, and Owen saw the way their faces softened, saw the moment when they stopped seeing a half-orc monster and started seeing a baby, innocent and helpless and deserving of love. Mistress Grayson became a regular visitor, often bringing food or offering to watch Garrick so Owen and Kira could get a few hours of rest. Father Benedict returned and baptized Garrick in a simple ceremony at the mill, blessing him and welcoming him into the faith. Even the alderman stopped by, awkward and stiff but genuine in his well wishes. Marcus continued to avoid the mill and glare at Kira when their paths crossed in the village, but his influence was waning, his hatred starting to look more like stubbornness than righteousness. The world, slowly but surely, was changing, and Owen and Kira and little Garrick were at the center of that change. Summer came again. A full year since Kira had nearly drowned and Owen had pulled her from the river and changed both their lives forever. They celebrated Garrick's naming day with a small gathering of friends, including Mistress Grayson, Father Benedict who happened to be passing through, and a handful of villagers who had become allies. It was not a large celebration, but it was full of warmth and laughter. And as Owen looked around at the people gathered in his home, at his wife holding their son, at the life they had built together against all odds, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. That evening, after everyone had left and Garrick was asleep in his cradle, Owen and Kira stood outside the mill, looking up at the stars. Kira leaned against him, and Owen wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up any chance of returning to your people?" Kira was silent for a moment, and then she turned to look at him, her amber eyes bright in the starlight. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You and Garrick are my people now. This mill, this village, this life we have built, this is my home. I would not trade it for anything." Owen kissed her, slow and sweet, pouring all his love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," he said simply. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Kira replied, "always and forever." They stood there together under the stars, husband and wife, parents, partners in every sense of the word. The river flowed past, the same river that had nearly claimed Kira's life and instead had brought her to Owen. The mill wheel turned, grinding grain into flour, continuing the work that Owen's family had done for generations, and that Garrick would one day inherit. And inside the mill, a baby slept peacefully, safe and loved, the future made flesh. The orc girl had been drowning in the current and the miller had jumped in to save her. What he did next changed both their lives, transforming strangers into lovers, enemies into family, fear into hope. They had faced prejudice and danger and doubt, but they had faced it together. And in doing so they had proved that love could bridge any divide, could overcome any obstacle, could create beauty and joy and new life even in the most unlikely of places. And as Owen and Kira turned to go back inside, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future might bring, they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had found in each other something rare and precious and worth fighting for. They had found home.